It's May the 25th, 2021, and coming up on this week's episode, we look back on the Monaco Grand Prix, and the Monaco Grand Prix which saw 3 first-time visitors to that Monte Carlo podium, which of course means a first-time winner on those gilded streets. We will look stateside because NASCAR was racing in the wet at COTA, and while they were over there, the field was being set for the 105th running of the Indy 500. All 33 places on the grid have now been set, and we look back over some thrilling days around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. There's some news coming your way from the World Endurance Championship, also some news coming your way from MotoGP, and it's all coming up this week on this week's episode of This Week. Hello then folks, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in and for your continued support. Let's start in Monaco, the most watched race pretty much globally of the year, the grandest Grand Prix of them all, as Bob Varsha always used to say. And it was wonderful to be back, wonderful to have fans back in the grandstands as well, and an enjoyable weekend, but a pretty topsy-turvy one and a crazy one which saw Ferrari have the pace from the off, and it looked like it was going to be fought out between Ferrari and Red Bull for the whole weekend. Mercedes never really looking like they were going to have a look in, certainly not Lewis Hamilton, who appeared off the pace all the way through. Ultimately it came down to getting the tyres up to temperature on what was, for most of the weekend, quite a cool track. Some teams got it right from the start, like Ferrari. Some teams struggled throughout the weekend, and those who we'd expected to be competitive ultimately weren't. I'm thinking of the likes of Alpine, whose times through the final sector at Barcelona had led us to believe that they would be competitive here on the slow corners of the streets of Monte Carlo. Ultimately it proved not to be. Indeed, Esteban Ocon only really finding the grip in his tyres when he got into Q1 for the first time in the weekend. They suddenly turned on, but his car was set up for tyres which weren't turning themselves on. And so it proved to be a really difficult weekend for everybody. Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, as I've said, on the pace from the outset. Carlos Sainz actually looking possibly like the more competitive of the two. But it was Charles who'd set a pole position, a provisional pole position time, and then put it into the wall. Carlos was fuming, not only because he didn't get to put his final lap together, but also because he'd been sent out behind Charles, been sent out into traffic, and was really frustrated with the way that Saturday went down. When it got to Sunday, though, Charles didn't even make it to the grid. Ultimately, it was the drive shaft hub that had failed on the left-hand side of the car. The team hadn't even checked that because it was only the right-hand side of the car they believed had been damaged in that qualifying accident that Charles had undergone on the Saturday. Ferrari have said they'll need to look at their processes, need to look at what they do in incidents like that so that that kind of a mistake isn't made again. My old colleague from the Speed Channel and NBC Sports days, Steve Matchett, has compared it to the Apollo 11 mission, not bothering to check if both Buzz and Neil were back on the module before leaving the surface of the moon, which I quite liked. But yeah, ultimately not checking that side of the car, not checking that part of the car, costing Charles potentially a first Monaco Grand Prix victory. Does he only have himself to blame? I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, yeah, because that mistake was his. That was on him, but it is now 5 times in a row, the 2 races in Formula 2 and now the 3 races in Formula 1 that he hasn't finished. Indeed, this wasn't just a DNF, this was a DNS. But his teammate Carlos Sainz putting in a beautiful race to come home in second, just behind the Red Bull, of course, of Max Verstappen, who looked brilliant all the way through the weekend. Lando Norris coming through a sensational third for McLaren, just ahead of Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull, the team employing the perfect strategy for Sergio, leaving him out as long as they could to actually overcut the drivers who'd pitted early, the earliest pitter being Lewis Hamilton, who questioned the team's strategy at the moment it was employed, knew it was the mistake, and so it proved to be as he fell down the order from the positions he'd managed to make up early on, ultimately winding his way behind Pierre Gasly and a resurgent Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin. A double point score for Aston Martin, a really good result for them. Comparatively, they're still not overall happy, of course, with their competitiveness this season. But when you look at how fast are the likes of Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren, to get a P5 finish on the board for Sebastian Vettel, I think was a really good result in Monaco. It was a disappointing day for Mercedes, I should say. A disappointing day for Lewis Hamilton. A really disappointing day for Valtteri Bottas as well, who had looked like he could challenge for pole position and might even be have been the story of qualifying. Had Lewis's woes not been so great, had Charles not crashed, and had Valtteri been able to complete his lap, an opportunity for him to have taken pole or certainly a front row. And then coming into the pits, was he slightly off his marks? Did the gun go on slightly off? Had the wheel not been put on slightly off when that front right was put on originally? All these things will come out in the wash because that front right tyre, when it left Monaco, was still secured to the front right of that Mercedes. Ultimately, the wheel nut being burred by the gun, and they couldn't loosen it. And that was it. Valtteri's day done. He was tremendously frustrated. When we talk of frustration, though, no greater frustration than for Daniel Ricciardo, who just couldn't get his weekend together. And really, I think the frustration now will come in the lack of progression, or seeming lack of progression, from Bahrain through to Monaco in getting the car turned, getting it rotated. It's where Daniel's struggling the most. This is a track on which he's won. It's a track he knows like the back of his hand, a track he loves. And he put the lap together, but would get to the end of the lap and the time just isn't there. What he said is he doesn't want to see paralysis. He needs to see analysis. He doesn't want to be stuck where he is right now because things are just not working for him at McLaren, as he was lapped by Lando Norris on Lando's way to that podium. Also a frustrating weekend for Fernando Alonso, as Esteban Ocon again managed to come home in the points. Fernando unable to get it turned on, again on a street circuit that he knows well, really showing the difference between Fernando and Esteban this weekend. Even if there was a slight element of luck for Esteban, as we said, those tyres getting turned on, finding the grip in those tyres, even though the car wasn't really set up for it. A good weekend also for Alfa Romeo. Antonio Giovinazzi coming home P10 for the first point of the year for that team, P11 for Kimi Raikkonen. A good turnaround for them, showing the strength that actually they have and the consistency that they've had across the board for this season. And I also have to say, I think a really good weekend for Pierre Gasly, coming home 6th ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Another frustrating weekend for Yuki Tsunoda, but he just needs to build himself back up from the frustrations and the disappointments of those early races. I also want to say, I think that Nikita Mazepin had a good weekend. And I say that without a shadow or a hint of irony. Everyone, and I saw him as he was leaving the circuit on Sunday night. And I said, how did you feel your weekend went? And he went, well, I think everyone expected me to put it in the wall. And it's true. Fans, media, critics, everyone expected Mazepin to have dinged his car at some point over the weekend. And yet he was the only rookie, the only F1 rookie who didn't put it in the wall. Latifi, his first year racing Formula 1 in Monaco, let's not forget, he put it in the wall. Schumacher, his teammate, Mazepin's teammate, put it in the wall. Did what the team believed to be over $500,000 worth of damage. Tsunoda put it in the wall. Mazepin kept his nose clean. Yeah, okay, they finished 3 laps down at the end of the Grand Prix. That's got more to do with the car, though, than I think the driver. He had a solid weekend, and yeah, it's all you can ask for at the moment, really, from him. Difficult one for Williams again around the streets of Monaco, but yeah, overall, quite an enjoyable weekend to see fans back in the grandstands. And we should also say, to see a new championship leader in Max Verstappen taking over at the top from Lewis Hamilton. He's finished first or second in every Grand Prix this year. That is consistency. Red Bull also taking over at the top of the Constructors' Championship by 1 point. So, yeah, thrilling. 5 races down and new leaders in the Constructors' and Drivers' Championships. While we're still talking about Formula One, we should also note the FIA Presidential race is heating up. Jean Todt will not sit for another term. Graham Stoker has this morning announced himself to be in the running to replace Jean Todt. He's the FIA's current Deputy for Sport, and he's launched his bid to succeed Jean Todt, whilst also announcing that Mr. Le Mans, Tom Christensen, will be his running mate. It's a seriously strong lineup. He will run under the banner of FIA for All. The election is due to take place in December, and the only other candidate confirmed thus far is the former rally driver Mohammed Ben Sulayem. While we talk about the run to be FIA president, we must of course also look back on the life and the career of Max Mosley, who died aged 81 from cancer. I described him as a titan of the sport when I sort of tweeted about it yesterday. He's one of the two pillars with Bernie, sort of on whose shoulders the sport as we know it was created. He had an incredible intellect and probably would have gone into politics was it not for the reputation, obviously, of his father. As it was, he went into law, then in a roundabout way sort of fell into trying to become a racing driver, realised he probably didn't have the acumen to be a racing driver, so became a team owner, launched March, and got into then becoming the barrister for the Formula One Teams Association, through that an association with Bernie, and then became this grand politician in Formula One and ultimately became the FIA president. He was controversial, yes. He could be vindictive also. But he was also an incredibly astute politician, and had great wit and charm, which he brought to the role as well. He left his role when revelations about his personal life were brought into the public domain by a newspaper who he then took to court and won. And that newspaper now no longer exists in the UK. It brought to light a lot of underhand practices that the press in the UK were using at that time, and Max became an advocate for privacy and against press intrusion. That was where he dedicated his efforts in the final years of his life. He was, as I said, a titan, somebody on whose shoulders this sport as we know it was created. One of a kind was Max Mosley, the likes of which we have not seen and likely will never see again. Now, it wasn't just Formula One on the streets of Monte Carlo. Formula 2, of course, was there, as well as Théo Pourchaire. I guess was kind of crowned a prince, let's say a prince of Monaco, becoming the youngest pole sitter and race winner at just 17 years of age, taking the feature race spoils. Earlier in the weekend, Guan Yu Zhou had won the first sprint race, and Dan Ticktum was ultimately declared the winner of the second sprint race after Liam Lawson was stripped of his win for violating regulations as regards throttle maps. He ran the wrong throttle map for the start of his race, which ultimately led to him losing a position at the start. That doesn't matter though. Rules is rules, and when it comes to the throttle maps, they're absolutely black and white. There is no wiggle room, and despite a brilliant performance, that win taken away from Liam Lawson. As it stands, Guan Yu Zhou leads the championship on 68 points from Oscar Piastri, who had a lovely little defensive battle with Dan Ticktum in the weekend. Really great driving from him on 52, and Pourchaire is on 47 points. Also, after races in Imola and in Spain, Formula Regional Alpine landed in Monaco with wins for France's Isaac Hadjar and for Barbados racer Zane Maloney, their first wins of this season. Gregoire Saucy still leads the standings ahead of Paul Aaron, with Hajar, Quinn and Maloney following them up in the championship order. IndyCar now, and one of the most exciting weeks in racing, one of the most exciting weeks that I've ever broadcast, and it is the qualifying week at IMS. Every day an absolute thrill as practice leads up and increases the speed and adds the boost as the cars get trimmed and the top speed increases and you get down to those 4 laps, 10 miles, one shot. It's fun. It's such fun and it's such high stakes gambling. Stick or twist, go for another run as the temperature fluctuates. It's just an absolute thrill fest. We have seen the full field of 33 now set for the 105th running of the Indy 500. And who is on pole? Scott Dixon. I mean, the argument for him being the greatest of all time in IndyCar history just keeps getting stronger and stronger, even against this incredibly strong field of youngsters, with Colton Herta and Rinus VeeKay lining up on the front row of the grid with him. Still Scott Dixon there. Still there. In fact, a brilliant week for Ganassi as all 4 cars got into the Fast 9. Wonderful to see Ganassi absolutely firing on all cylinders right now, and also topping the final day of practice before Carb Day as well. So yeah, a really great run there. Fascinating to see if they can maintain that pace, which they've had all the way through, and follow it through into the race itself, which of course comes our way on Sunday. At the back of the field, the other really thrilling part, of course, is that there was a bump day. There were drivers who got bumped out, and in the end, one of those drivers who could have been bumped out, Will Power. I mean, that just tells you everything about the Indy 500, that a former winner, a recent former winner, could have been bumped out, and he had to put it all on the line to pull it in, and he even dinged the wall. Didn't even know if he'd make it to the end of his 4 laps. Such was the potential damage to that right-hand side of the car as he clattered the barriers. But he did. He got in alongside Sage Karam and Simona De Silvestro, who brings the Beretta Sports Autosport car into the field, the almost entirely all-female team. Doing a wonderful thing. It's a great story there, and Simona proving once again her mettle as a racer to get into the Indy 500. Really looking forward to the race on Sunday. Secretly hoping maybe Juan Pablo Montoya wins, given that when the list was released earlier today of who had opted for which type of milk, whole milk, 2%, skimmed milk, whatever you want, Juan Pablo Montoya wrote chocolate milk.
I like chocolate milk.
So yeah, secretly, obviously, I think a lot of people harbouring some desire to see Juan Pablo Montoya celebrate by chugging chocolate milk after the Indy 500. That would be something. Also, keep an eye on Connor Daly, not least for his beautiful, glorious mullet. But he's been fast. He's been fast all the way through the month of May, and proved so again on the final day of practice, P3. Didn't quite trim the car out, didn't quite take the gamble that he might have done in qualifying. But if you want an outside bet for someone looking really good for that Indy 500, look no further than your man Connor Daly. Finally, with IndyCar, sad news, unfortunately, as well, that Andre Ribeiro has lost his life to cancer. He took Honda's first IndyCar victory at New Hampshire in 1995. He'd go on to win races throughout his IndyCar career, including winning at home, on home soil in Rio. He'd finish his career in IndyCar with Penske, and then Roger would send him off to Brazil to set up car dealerships out there. A lovely guy who was beloved by IndyCar's fan base and within the paddock. As I said, lost tragically young to cancer, was just 55. Now, the Fuji 24 Hours GT-Net Motorsports won the race. But the reason that we're going to look at it is because I think by far the biggest story was that Toyota made the successful debut of a hydrogen-powered Corolla Sport. Now, Kamui Kobayashi and Toyota president Akio Toyoda, who actually races under a pseudonym every now and then, actually drove the car in the Fuji 24. The project is different to a lot of hydrogen projects because it doesn't involve the use of a fuel cell. It involves an internal combustion engine, and Kobayashi was so impressed with it. He said that he wants it to be used in motorsport in the future. He absolutely was singing its praises, and not just because he's contracted to Toyota, just genuinely believes it's a good idea. Fascinating stuff, I think, in seeing how we can make motorsport sustainable. The one thing with this is because it used the internal combustion engine, it still had a noise, it still had that thing that made it quite racy for a racer and for a race fan. But obviously being done in what is an environmentally sound and potentially sustainable manner. Yes, obviously pit stops took a long time, pace wasn't there, but the fact that it ran and ran well and ran at all, I guess, evidence that hydrogen may yet be another avenue on which motorsport can take a path, and a successful path, into the future. MotoGP news now, and ahead of the team's home race at Mugello, Ducati has confirmed that it will retain Jack Miller for the 2022 season. Now, alongside Miller and Bagnaia, the team has also confirmed, or has already got in the pipeline, Jorge Martin at Pramac. So he's already signed up as well. But also confirmation coming during the week that Jorge, who had injured himself at the Portimao round, will also be missing the Mugello race as he seeks to obviously recover fully from the injuries sustained at the Portugal round. Meanwhile, on two wheels, Jonathan Rea took his 100th win in the season opener of World Superbikes at Aragon and went on to win the Superpole race as well. But he crashed with Garrett Gerloff in the final race, which saw Scott Redding dominate. Rea leads the standings after the opening round from Alex Lowe's and the aforementioned Redding. In endurance racing, Porsche and Audi have confirmed that they will both build their LMDH cars for use in WEC and IMSA around a Multimatic LMP2 chassis in 2023. This makes a lot of sense because Multimatic is based in Mooresville, North Carolina, which of course is where Penske is based as well, in North Carolina, meaning that, of course, Penske running the Porsche entry should be a little bit easier for them. Other reasons as well, obviously, but yeah, that is your little bit of endurance news for the week. In NASCAR, controversy abounds as the championship raced at the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, and the heavens opened and the rain fell, and as always, on a street course, it's not a street course, is it? On a road course, on a road course, when the rain falls, there are a few incidents and a few crashes and a few unhappy characters at the end of the race. One person who wasn't overly unhappy, well, a little unhappy, but happy, Chase Elliott, his first win of the season after the race was red flagged for a second time and thus shortened. He won ahead of Larson and Logano. Now, in the World Rally Championship, Elfyn Evans claimed his first victory of the 2021 season at Rally Portugal, almost 30 seconds ahead of Danny Sordo, with Sebastian Ogier a further minute back in third. Neuville and Tanak had both retired from the overall rally, well, crashed out earlier on, but managed to get their car up and running to take part in the power stage, which Tanak ultimately ended up winning from Neuville with Ogier in third, which means that in the standings after Rally Portugal, Ogier leads Evans by 2 points, with Neuville a further 20 behind in third. And this weekend sees the return of Extreme E for the Ocean X Prix in Senegal. The championship will see a return to its intended format this weekend with a 4-car shootout finale, which obviously had to be abandoned for their first round because of the excessive dust in the desert of Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, in team news, Kevin Hansen will replace Jenson Button as the 2009 F1 champion decides to step back from driving duties at his team and concentrate on team management. And finally, folks, I do, and then finally sometimes on people in the motorsport world that we've lost, sadly. And today's one is a really personal one, and it's hit a lot of us incredibly hard, and not just in Formula One, but throughout the motorsport world. We lost a really good guy last night, Thomas Boncaire, who was a cameraman and so much more, a beloved friend to so many, in so many paddocks throughout the world. You won't have known him maybe by his name, but you will have seen the footage that he created in Formula One, in the World Touring Car Championship, in the World Endurance Championship, at Le Mans, in the Race of Champions, at Dakar, around the world. He was one of the best cameramen in motor racing. He loved the sport, could find something unique and beautiful to pull out at every occasion. And even this weekend in Monaco, he was working the pit lane and around the track, and after the race, Jean-Michel Tibi, who those two were like brothers in arms. Jean-Michel said, "Where were you for the race?" And Thomas apparently said, I found this great new angle, I found somewhere new. Still after 30 years, finding new angles. He was a really good guy. He loved nothing more than being a dad. In recent years, he'd found peace living out in Thailand, and he loved just taking his boat out and going fishing, watching the sunset, and then coming and doing crazy motor races. But he was kind, and he was compassionate, he was considerate. His last words to me when I saw him over the weekend were thoughtful and considered, because he knew I'd been having a difficult time with, and he just always had really good words of advice. The motorsport world is opening its heart in sorrow and shock for our dear friend Thomas, who we will miss awfully. His colleagues at Canal Plus, his family and his loved ones, and particularly all the boys in the camera garage. I'm thinking of all of them who knew him the best. But he was a really, really lovely guy, and it just sucks